Our panelists today are Bilal Wilson, who is an expert, and he's at the permanent mission of Saudi Arabia at the United Nations. Mr. Wilson actually helped to draft the Committee on Status of Women documents and was one of the conveners of the recent Committee on Status of Women at the United Nations. And our other panelist, who will be back from feeding her meter in a minute, is Frady Reese. Frady is the Executive Director of Unchained at Last, a nonprofit that helps women and girls leave or avoid arranged and forced marriages. She says tracking child marriages in the U.S. can be difficult. At the present moment, she says there isn't reliable data on child marriages for 48 out of 50 states. And I did want to mention that our third panelist who sends regrets, Dr. Husseini Alidu, who is Faculty Department of African American and African Studies. Her sister is the ambassador to Niger, and her younger sister came to visit the ambassador, her sister, and unfortunately, the ambassador was called back to Niger, and her younger sister fell ill and is in the hospital in DC. So she had to go be with her, so she sent her regrets to us today. I wanted to start by asking just about the film. Maybe you could share maybe one thing that you found found powerful or meaningful to you in the film.
Well, first let me thank you for hosting this event. Let me thank the Women Media for organizing this this fabulous, wonderful festival. I think it's a great experience to see different films and features and artists and having an opportunity to get together and talk about this. I thought the film overall was just fabulous. I absolutely loved it. I don't know if the director or the writer's here, but I would love to give her a round of applause just for the amazing work that she did. The storyline, the cinematography, the acting, it was all, very, very good. Revert back to your question. For me, I think it would be maybe one character I would like to highlight that I really liked. I really enjoyed the truck driver. I'm not sure of his name, and I'll explain to you why. I think that his character shows the complexities of this problem in society. Because his character, first of all, I was really happy that his character was in a movie, because his character shows that not everyone in Pakistan thinks like the person who was trying to have the girl be married to him, And I think it showed a diversification of the societal and cultural issues that undermine this problem in general. And so I was actually very pleased with his character and in the presence of his character. To highlight that it is an extremely complex issue for certain cultures, and it's such that not everyone thinks that way.
Thank you. This is Frady Reese. Again, I introduced you while you were out feeding your meter. And my first question was, could you maybe say one thing that you found powerful or meaningful in the film that we just saw?
Well, I think for me, the experience of watching it might have been a little bit different, because I've actually worked closely with forced marriage survivors in Pakistan, American citizens who were taken overseas, young women and girls taken overseas to Pakistan to be forced into marriage. So for me, it rang very true, and I got very teary-eyed. I don't know about all of you, but it was very emotional, very, very beautiful film. And but the power of a mother's love, and multi-generational in that movie. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that in real life. But at least in the movie, it was beautiful to see.
So you kind of already introduced my next question, is how does the theme of this forced early marriage in this film relate to the work that you do?
It doesn't relate to the work we do. It actually shows it. It actually, it's, as I said, this is what we do. Unfortunately, often there is not a mother who is willing or able to step up in the way that you saw that mother in the movie. and even the grandmother in the movie, who was so supportive of her daughter and took her life in her hands to meet with her daughter. Often in real life that doesn't happen. So what we do at Unchained at Last is we step in for those girls and young women, or women of any age, who don't have a mother who's able to help them.
Movies like this, I mean, not just this movie, movies in general really highlight what you said, the issue itself. It brings it to the forefront, it educates the population, and it allows policymakers to figure out ways to address it. But I think it also, like I said, helps the public in understanding the issue from many different perspectives. From the, I mean, there was a couple things I also wanted to point out about this movie too. Was in the beginning the political relationship, because their marriage originally was kind of like a political deal to stop the warring factions, I think, from the two tribes in the beginning, if I'm not mistaken. And so, a lot of times with these issues is that it's culture and it's politics that are involved in a lot of issues, whether it's tribes or whether it was in Europe in the early centuries where it was like nobles like marrying for political reasons and things like that. I mean, I think that's also something to remember as well that the movie highlighted. And so I think that's what the movie does, is that it brings a level of education to the population, which then, shows a problem and then allows policymakers to try to address it.
And saying that, could you say a little bit more about what you do?
So I kind of start just a little bit at the beginning. My name is Bilal Wilson. I'm originally from Newark, New Jersey. This is why I know Miss Morgan very, very well. My family's known each other for a long time. I went to voice course down on Broad Street. I was an ABC scholar, a Better Chance scholar. I went to College of Chicago, and as she said earlier, I'm at the permanent mission of Saudi Arabia to the United Nations. I have been blessed. I've traveled all over the world. I've visited peacekeeping missions in South Sudan, and Mali, Guinea-Bissau. I've been to Dubai a couple times. And so, my file in particular, like the mission, deals with a couple different things. I've worked on peacekeeping issues, humanitarian aid issues, human rights issues, most recently human rights, and I'll get to that with the film. And I've worked on development issues, etc. Now, most recently with the human rights section, we had the Commission for the Status of Women, which many of you might be familiar with, is a resolution that comes before the UN every year, which is negotiated amongst the members that are part of this commission on the status of women. We're basically the current status of women, how far they have to come, how far they have to go. There's a report issued by the Secretary General on women's health, reproductive issues, everything. It's pretty comprehensive, the resolution. And it gets very political for obvious reasons. And so what I did recently was just the past 2 weeks, I actually was one of the negotiators for the Commission for the Status of Women. And so many people say, what is Saudi Arabia doing negotiating the Commission for the Status of Women? But I think I think that it was a very constructive role that Saudi Arabia played in that. I always, if anything, I bring my own personal experiences to it. I was raised by a single mother. And it was one where one of the things I think that, if I could give some overarching things of not just Saudi Arabia but the resolution as a whole, was that we recognize how far people have to go and women have to, and societies have to work in advancing women's rights. We also want to recognize how far we've already come. And so I think that was the issues that Saudi Arabia was trying to put into the resolution, was what I like to call, and I call it in negotiation, was balance. And I meant balance by, for in our case, in Saudi Arabia's case, the country's only 86 years old. It was just founded in the 1930s. And so, the first school for girls was just opened in the 1960s, early 70s. And then now, in 2015, 55% of our graduates are female. So, it's not saying that we don't have a long way to go, but it's just understanding how far in only 86 years Saudi Arabia has come, And I think that was, as far as my role within the text itself, was trying to just highlight some of those things and some of those issues.
Thank you. And Freddie, can you say a lot more about what you do at your organization with forced early marriage, and maybe how you came to it too?
Okay, sure. So Unchained at Last is based in Westfield, and it is the only nonprofit in the U.S. that's dedicated to helping women and girls escape arranged and forced marriages. So I I hope I didn't give the impression before that all of our clients are from Pakistan or taken to Pakistan, because we work with clients from a really wide range, any culture, community, or religion that practices arranged or forced marriage. And of course, forced marriage can happen at any age, so our clients are not only children, but are also adults from run the age gamut all the way up into their, I think, 50s is where we have our oldest client. And I founded the organization out of my own traumatic experience. I was in an arranged marriage when I was young. I was 19, and it was an abusive marriage from the start, but in the community in which I was raised, divorce is really difficult, especially for women. I did not have the legal right under my religious law to divorce my husband, only he had the right to divorce me. And I had very limited reproductive rights. I was not allowed to use birth control. Had my first child 11 months after my wedding, and pretty soon had 2 daughters. And even though it was a violent, abusive marriage from the beginning, my family did not support my wish to leave, and therefore I was trapped for 12 years. Finally managed to get out by becoming the first person in my family to go to college, went to Rutgers, graduated at 32, filed for divorce, got full custody of my daughters, and a final restraining order against my ex-husband. But my family, because I made this decision to leave, my family and community shunned me. My family declared me dead, and 9 years later I still have no contact with my family. But after I managed to put my life back together with my daughters, founded Unchained at Last to help women and girls in the US who are going through it.
And could you say just a little more about the issues or the problem that you're dealing with in the US?
Yeah, so, well, one of the first problems that we deal with in the US is the fact that most people don't realize that forced marriage, child marriage, arranged marriage even happens here. Were any of you here in the room familiar with these issues? Aware that it was happening? All right, so I'm seeing some hands. Some of you are shocked, though? A little surprised to hear me saying this. So our biggest problem is just letting people know that it happens here. And of course, our other problem is that we're only 4 years old and an almost all volunteer organization. I actually ran Unchained as a volunteer for most of its history. I was juggling it with a full-time job and raising 2 kids on my own until last August, when I was able to give up my real job and become a full-time paid staffer at Unchained. And yet we have already helped more than 200 women and girls from across the US. So doing that on that, thank you. Glad I came today. It feels good to get the applause. Thank you for the recognition. And so doing all that with an almost all volunteer organization and a very small budget has been challenging. And we provide really extensive services. We not only help coordinate escapes for women and girls, including, as I said, those who were taken overseas. We work with the State Department to bring them back and get them someplace safe, and we coordinate escapes domestically also for those here in the US who are in a forced marriage situation. And we also provide free legal representation for divorce, domestic violence, immigration. Often women and girls are brought from overseas as part of a forced marriage and don't have legal status, which makes it very difficult for them to get out of an abusive marriage. And so we help them get their legal status as well. And then psychotherapy, career counseling, financial planning, everything we can do to help get them out of a bad situation and rebuild their lives. And at the same time, we raise awareness about the fact that this happens. And we also push for legislation to protect women and girls from forced marriage. Our first bill was passed into law in New Jersey 2 years ago to help domestic violence survivors obtain restraining orders against their abusers. And we're currently working on legislation to end child marriage. Right now, child marriage is legal in all 50 states in the US, including here in New Jersey. I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in October to raise awareness about this. And since that op-ed ran, 4 states, including New Jersey, have introduced legislation to end child marriage. And we're working on those 4 states, and then only 46 states to go to end child marriage in the United States.
And just, can you say, what's the definition that you're talking about what is child marriage?
Child marriage is a marriage in which one or both parties is under the age of 18. And it's really shocking that it's legal in the United States. But anybody know what the minimum marriage age is in New Jersey?
16.
All right, so I heard some 18s and some 16s, and I think I heard an 11 or 12, which is alarming. But so the minimum marriage age in New Jersey, like in most US states, is 18, but there are 2 exceptions to that, and it's very common. Every single state has an exception to the minimum marriage age that allows children to marry. So in New Jersey, the first exception is parental consent, which lowers the age to 16, which a lot of you said 16, so you were right in that sense. And the problem with parental consent is that we have no way to be sure that it's not actually parental coercion. And we know that in a lot of cases, it's not the children asking mom and dad to sign, it's the opposite. Mom and dad saying, you're marrying this guy whether you like it or not. But then there is another exception in New Jersey, judicial approval, which lowers the marriage age even more. And anyone want to guess what it lowers the marriage age to?
13 and 14.
I hear 13 and 14. What if I told you that it's 0? What? With judicial approval, there is no minimum age in New Jersey below which a judge is no longer allowed to approve a marriage. And what we found at Unchained at Last is that between 1995 and 2012, almost 3,500 children were married here in New Jersey as young as 13. And most of them were minor girls married to adult men, often with age differences that count as statutory rape.
Now, switching to the law and policy work to be done at the global level, and your experience there with forced child marriage, what would you say about some of the, I know you mentioned it's political, it's cultural, but what is some of the work to be done there?
There has been a lot of work to be done to address. There's a significant number of resolutions, there's a significant number of policy papers that address forced early marriage. Early marriage is a little bit of a political situation. Forced early marriage, no one has, and forced childhood marriage and those kind of issues, no one has problems with. But when in the international level, when you talk about early marriage without the word forced in front of it, there's no international kind of definition of what early is. And then there's no kind of definition of parents' consent and things like that like you have at the state level. And so because of that, a lot of countries are very, very hesitant to adopt resolutions which they might think is contrary to their own internal laws and their own internal affairs. Even the United States, when they negotiated the Arms Trade Treaty, they were very adamant to the UN community that we had the Second Amendment, and nothing that in this treaty is going to violate the Second Amendment. So, countries are very, very sensitive to that. I think, though, there's some good work being done by the UNFPA, UN Women, UNFPA, sorry, I don't want to get too technical, stands for United Nations Population Fund. They deal with population issues, child issues, women's issues, etc. So there's a lot of good work being done by the funds and programs and agencies by the UN. There's also a lot of awareness. One of the things that we do a lot of times at the UN is not only pass resolutions, but a lot of times countries are kind of held accountable because, by every year having the Commission for the Status of Women, countries every year have to kind of give on the status of women in their countries, they'll report the percentage of women who have access to education, the literacy rate, all these kind of things. And so a lot of times what happens, people say, well, what is the UN doing? Well, the UN hasn't done much. And what I kind of say in response is that just by having these meetings and having countries come and address these issues, is putting pressure on them to address the downfalls or the different situations in each of their countries.